I guess, theorizing around digitalization and agriculture is a very new area, and exactly like the complexity around discourse that has been pointed out by everybody here, it's extremely important how you situate your analysis. We can be talking about smart solutions, smart farming, etc. But I think it's extremely important how we connect, historicize, and locate this in a normative idea of what do we really want. So I think that's what I'm trying to do here. So we already know the story of the corporate capture of agriculture, food systems, food sovereignty issues through the work of many people here, the social movements, and the macro structural analysis that we've had. And with datafication, it acquires a kind of a new flavor, and that's what I just wanted to focus on. Won't take too long. The presentation is pretty short. So I wanted to say that what we have witnessed to is not just the idea of information and knowledge in agriculture, traditional knowledge, the theft of traditional knowledge, the patentification of all of that, the productization of, what was essentially in the commons in the form of seeds, etc. But a new idea, which is basically the idea of very foundational infrastructures in agriculture undergoing a change. So this is attributable to the advent of what is not just the role of digital technologies in society at large, but also in the way in which the economy has changed and shifted through datafication. And this is a way in which the backbone systems of our economic structures are undergoing a rapid change, not just in the realm and the domain of agriculture, but broadly in the realm and domain of health, in the realm and domain of welfare systems, in the way in which communications and the public sphere operates. So today we don't even have public spheres that are not controlled by corporations. So all your communication is mediated through corporations. So it's a kind of a different way by which infrastructuralization through datafication has changed our systems. So it's a very simple thesis. So you actually see how those infrastructures operate. To do agriculture today, you have to think about 100 million things. That is the Internet of Things, right? Images being captured, images being then annotated. For instance, quality control in mandis being taken over by these artificial intelligence technologies, which will determine whether this rice is better than that rice. So in a certain way, the way you do the business of society, economy, and hence agriculture, food, that is shifting at a very fundamental foundational level. So this entire intelligence economy in agriculture is based on what we call, a critique of the discourse of data-based optimization. We think that we need to get everything right. This wonderful analysis that was presented by you, in terms of, are you using your water right? Are you using, your energy right? Are you getting your seeds right? Why are you getting your fertilizer wrong? All of that, in some sense, with the discourse that efficiency, maximization, and all of that come together in a certain smart discourse, right? So this is why drones are being used to locate what may be the size, the acreage, and then what exactly you need to do. And in fact, facial recognition technologies are being used in pig farming, right, to really recognize the health of what you're growing in terms of your, poultry and in terms of your piggery, etc. And global food automation industry was already billions, and now it's growing and it's doubling, and in a very short span of time, also owing to the pandemic and the role of technologies in general in facilitating economies of scale and scope, that I think we have to recognize. What is important, and this is a report I would encourage everybody to read, and for your social movement, some parts of this report can also be translated, and I'm sure the ETC group will be more than happy. We see that the industrial food chain today really requires big data for everything. So you actually have a supply chain, a traditional supply chain, from how you preserve seeds, how you grow, how you sow, how you reap, and then how you transport, and then how you sell, and then how you also on other allied value chains, how you do, let's say, food processing, These are allied industries, right? Now that is completely turned on its head through what is called big logistics. So the farm to table businesses, as they like to call themselves, are people who use other laws like contract farming laws, for instance, to kind of observe, deal in future markets, and control the production end to end. So we are actually seeing, all of this adds up very well, right? The presence of people who are, and also somebody gave the example of who was actually dealing in those food stocks in the wheat markets, right? That's because predicting and controlling things is now possible. And I wouldn't say that, of course, with the arrogance of a person who believes in technology, but rather of what one is empirically observing corporations do. What they're able to do is actually take control because they believe they can predict, and they believe, nature is in their control. So that's what I'm trying to point out. And a couple of years ago, we also do research on health, pharma, and big technologies. So what we actually observed is the leader of one of the biggest pharma companies actually stood up and said, it's not enough for us to be pharma companies anymore. We have to be tech companies. By that is meant the role of data and digitalization has become normalized in the ways in which agriculture is done. So you see the coming together of Bayer, Syngenta, and others in the form of big data companies. And Bayer's FieldView digital platform, for instance, you can see how many billion data points across how many acreages of farmland are being collected through these architectures, right, of the cloud, various software platforms, all of that which are corporatized, not just privatized. So in some sense, the world's largest farm machinery company today, Deere, now employs more software engineers than mechanical engineers. So the business of how to do the business of agriculture itself has shifted. That's what I'm saying. And online grocery platforms, the ones that we know, Zomato and others, have really become the way by which urban consumption particularly has transitioned. Here I want to therefore say that infrastructures are coalescing. So there is the telecommunications infrastructure, then the data infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, and agricultural infrastructure, right? All of this is coming together because there's a big scramble for who can predict better, who can control better. So, one is the idea that you provide connectivity and then, you can partner for, machinery sales. Planet Labs, an Earth imaging company, which is basically satellite data, which is really going into the New York Stock Exchange after a merger backed by Google and BlackRock. You will recall that recently feminist movements around the world really pushed back on some kind of project that the UN Women was starting to do in a crisis of multilateralism that's, like a tragic comedy, where BlackRock was supposed to actually, save the women of the world. So we actually see, again, instances of Microsoft and Amazon getting into what is called a new phenomenon, ground station as a service. So you collect all that data and then you need to bring satellite data together with IoT data and other forms of data so that in seamless communication, all these data sets will provide decisions at a flashpoint, right? Chutki mein. That is the whole idea. So what we see is a new mode of infrastructuralization in agriculture and food systems. And I use food systems here in a very, very critical way of pointing out how what you consume, whether the strawberry will be available for you in December, and exactly like, Jack Ma used to say, when you already program for how your even those, ships, which are container ship companies, the way they're parked outside in the ports, because they know that the Chinese New Year is coming and they can predict exactly how many coats will be ordered this year. And all of this is not some kind of a fictional film. This is very real, the way those ports are operating in tandem with big logistics. I don't have to also even underline this, but all my co-panelists and esteemed co-panelists have said this, that there are similar trends in India that cannot be ignored. And these are tie-ups, these are investments. This is a way in which actually we see Facebook's investment in Jio. So these are crossovers because WhatsApp-based, marginal and tiny, right, micro marginal enterprises, small enterprises, they're getting on WhatsApp and selling because we have UPI. You could actually do payments and businesses on WhatsApp, and many of you here would already perhaps, and your members of your organizations or FPOs would be using this, right? They're selling on WhatsApp. So Meta really sees the investment opportunities here, and you can actually see this mammoth coming together of a multiplicity of infrastructure companies in agriculture. So the policy response to the data turn in agriculture value chains is abysmal. I mean, we say that multilateralism has failed, but the imagination is completely lacking because nobody is able to recognize what to do in this kind of a gargantuan complexity, right? The complexity is you have to regulate markets for monopolies. You have to regulate markets so that data doesn't become the commodity that you are using as currency to consolidate. So actually, as you said, Jayati, the answers will be there if there is a conviction to find solutions, but the recognition of the problem and the definition of the problem statement in policy spaces is falling short. I just want to point out to two very important shifts, because we are in our head, digitalization in agriculture started in India at least 15-20 years ago, right? But I would really urge everybody to not think in the Bhumi paradigm where land records were digitalized. And I want to caution everybody not to stay in that paradigm, because the datafication trends in agriculture and land records has shifted the debate into a completely new planet, and I will just say how. So there was this roadmap offered by McKinsey in 2019 that we need to merge these disparate land records. So, okay, Maharashtra has a system, Karnataka has a system, Orissa has a system. All these can be in a centralized system where they can serve as a unified point of information. Why? Ostensibly because access to credit, financial tech, insurance, all of this is important to farmers. Nobody ever denies that. So the point here is that when all this gets unified, at a click of a button, apparently you will actually have a verification system there, and through a verification system, I will determine that the farmer is indeed eligible for, let's say, subsidies or welfare or whatever. Now there's a huge danger here, because it's not as if, we know what has happened through the health insurance idea, right? And the idea here is the transparency that is going to be there of the last person to the market is completely 100% or even more. And in fact, I would say more than 100%, because the irony here, if you look at one example like EdTech, everybody knows Byju's. What does Byju's do? It takes the information of the child from the schools through these Google suites and other information, or anywhere in the data market, because all this information is available. It will sell certain courses, tuitions, right? In the process, slowly gather information about the income levels of the family. Sometimes they complement it with actual ground level surveys, so that you have a profile of the household in a way that is so chilling that the company knows more about your future than you already know. You are clinging on to some hope that your debt will be paid off, the health of your family member will be better. But the prediction model of all these companies actually shows how the household is going to, tumble down the kind of, socioeconomic location that it is on. The second development that has taken place, other than this convergence, after listening to McKinsey, the government decided we are going to do a unique land parcel identification initiative, which is the Aadhaar of land. This has been launched in 2021, and this is that every parcel is going to be identified through a drone. It will be mapped, and this kind of identification and mapping is going to happen every few years. We will not have the census of India, but we will have the census of land every few years, couple of years, because readying this information for the market is extremely important, so that as an emerging market, more people will come to you because you will present the data and say, here, we are all, set. Our back office systems are working wonderfully. You can just build on top of this. The second trend that is happening post the land digitalization is the agri-stack, which many of us are working on in terms of communicating with the government on what would really be a people-centered system. This is a government-backed data exchange in agriculture. We should remember that we still don't have a personal data protection law in the country. And this is not just about the privacy of the farmer, right? Not just about the personal or sensitive personal information about who they are, which caste they belong to. We are not even talking that, which is so fundamentally important. We are saying that there are other kinds of aggregate level information about very many, you were pointing out about Maharashtra, about Northeast, about different systems of cropping. Some systems are completely outside of market-based systems, right? They are in the common systems. And what is really going to happen is all of this will be harmonized and dumbed down into methodologies which can measure. So the intent is to transform real life transactions, which are usually complex and local and not necessarily scientific and reducible, into data systems that can then enable you to not only trade in land, but trade in data about land. And that, I think, is so important, because from soil health to the actual hydrology, the presence of water systems, etc., all of this is to aid the creation of data-enabled support services. Somebody will come and tell you whether you can dig a bore well because they have the data. Somebody will come and sell you something because they tell you, हमें पता है, आपको पता नहीं है. So that entire idea of disenfranchising and dispossessing people is really reaching a level of, I think, shock and awe that requires us to really build up a movement from the below. Last couple of slides. So this is really worsened the historical problem that we have experienced in terms of projects like Bhumi. There is a single source of truth. The truth is an uncontestable truth which will be there in the data systems, and it is not really in the way in which you have experienced your relationship with the land. It disenfranchises communities and opens up an entire Pandora's box of concerns about the data commons. Because what happens to Gomala, what happens to the forest lands where people are cultivating, you might just be already given a label without your knowledge in the data exchange. So these are really forms of dispossession that is not even known to you transparently, worse than that IPEF thing that is being signed, because people believe that, when they actually see the materiality of land in the morning, that is real. But it is actually not, because there is some other truth somewhere else. There is a state facilitated enclosure of the commons. This is an active participation and a new way of doing your liberalization of agriculture, which is basically you bring in 10 different MOUs. It's not in the public domain. Very difficult for activists to put out an RTI. We have also done certain RTIs, and oftentimes the information that comes back is the reason given is, in strategic national interest, we can't share this data with you. This is very troubling. The Agri-Stack program, the Health Stack program, all these stacks, the eShram database, there are many stacks like this, and all of them have very similar techno-managerial, centralized, undemocratic views. And these pilots don't happen with consultations, and corporations have already built if you really talk to Star Agri Bazaar, which is one of the companies working in North India, they'll tell you they have household level data of, forefathers to, grandchildren. I think that in the agrarian context, even local economies don't have. So data grab is land grab. So we actually have reached a point where, and this is where I want to come to the multilateral context. The multilateral system does not want to acknowledge this reality about which it has complete knowledge, especially because data scientists are sitting in the UN, data scientists are sitting everywhere, and they know that the statistical systems of yore, right, are not the same as the big data systems of contemporary societies and economies. So if you actually look at the FAO, for instance, we are participating in a civil society group, larger coalition with indigenous people, which is considering the establishment. The UN Committee on Food Security is now establishing a data trust fund. And they want food and nutrition data to actually be part of a common pool. Why? Because it's exactly like the virus information argument in the WHO. Everybody must send their samples. It would be centralized. It is an open source information. But who can make use of that open source? People with capabilities, right? You need to have technological labs. You need to have processing facilities. You need to have AI engineers, and you need to actually have the access to patenting. which is another point I'm coming to. In the name of this common data pool, what you actually do is the raw data is in the commons, but when it is taken out and it becomes processed information, that is patented. So the information belongs to you and me, but data technologies, because their infrastructure, allow what is called a rematerialization process, right? So data, which is abstract, goes into AI systems, which is material, and then they are rematerialized in the form of patents that come back in the form, and it's not just GMO. Now you're going to see another era of the forms of control over knowledge that are ridiculous, because the original owner, the original sovereign, who is the collective and sometimes the individual, that person will have no control over this knowledge that has actually been taken from her farming practices. So reflections is, I think we need to understand data sovereignty as linked to food and agricultural sovereignty. The second is, I really think that we need this new systems that are state-backed. So our organization is working with the Kerala government on a very important public sector supported agricultural platform system, so that the infrastructures are in the public domain. The public has a stake in those infrastructures, whether it is analysis, AI, whether it is a logistics chain, whether it is being called organic, nature positive, whatever. So the whole idea is, can we think about managing agricultural data commons through a system where we work closely with our local government? I think that's important, because the global powers that be will tell you it belongs to everybody, which basically means it belongs to none of you, but it belongs to the corporations. And thirdly and finally, I think we really need to argue in the multilateral spaces and push back and take our time to negotiate data-related rules. Because currently the data-related rules that are sought to be pushed through the WTO, because everyone is in haste, right? Because IPEF must come. It must come yesterday, right? On account of that story and narrative, we are told, let's be part of the data revolution. Come guys, it's really too late. Let's join the bandwagon. And this all economies will buy, because they want really to trade away their people and their natural resources and their data resources for some ambition to join the digital revolution bandwagon. Here I really want to say that the entire idea of food and nutrition based data, which is going to become a pool through this process of negotiations over the next 8 to 9 months. At the end of this year, there will actually be a committee, UN committee, that meets and adopts certain rules. We have to say open is okay, public is okay, with constraints, with restrictions. That open has to benefit the source of the data, right? From where you actually took the data. It cannot benefit a pharma company which is now masquerading as a data company. So this is what I wanted to say. I think that my first slide is very important for today and tomorrow, which is how do we collectively bring these connections together? And that I think is a collective proposition. Thank you very much.